Good afternoon, everyone. So this is Sri Ganapathy. I'm with Microsoft as well. I'm part of a team called the Global Black Belt, where we focus exclusively on some of our strategic priorities, AI being one of them. And that's the area that I focus on is AI and all the services that fall under that. So today, given the 30 minutes that we have, I want to go over the different services that Microsoft has to offer in this Azure AI area. So I'm sure some of you may have been familiar with some of the innovations that have come from Microsoft around this topic, but we've seen a significant increase in the number of customers that have been adopting our AI platform. Here are some examples that you see on this slide in different industries where customers of all sizes have been taking advantage of the AI services to improve their business processes, whether it's in increasing sales, whether it's in reducing time to market, whether it's in reducing certain key areas in the business that have caused pain. We have several examples, and this slide is just a sampling of some of them that we've been working with in the past couple of years. Another attestation to a lot of the innovation that Microsoft has been bringing in this area is also this recent Forrester report that places us squarely in the leaders wave when you look at the different vendors that are offering capabilities around our predictive analytics and machine learning focus areas. So that's again, great work that many of customers like you that are listening in are either adopting or looking at utilizing the Microsoft AI stack. So what do we mean by our AI services, or what really falls into this Azure AI bucket? And that's what I want to talk about today is how do we categorize the different offerings that we have and how you can take advantage of them in your existing applications. So when we look at our AI technology, we have three primary focus areas or mission statements that we want to make sure that our products are incorporating within themselves. The first one is to make sure that if you're building AI applications, it's got to be on your terms, meaning that no matter what your skill set is, what existing capabilities that you have, we want to make sure that we can support that. Whether you're a developer, whether you're a data engineer, whether you're a data scientist, we want to make sure that these services are available for the different personas that you may have in your organization that want to be part of the AI process. It also means that you may already have existing technologies or in implementations of AI, and we want to make sure that we can interoperate with that. This is not about taking everything that you have in-house and replacing them with Microsoft Azure AI. It's all about how do we interoperate with existing technologies that we already have in place. And I'll talk a little bit about this in further detail. One of the biggest focus areas for Microsoft, and I think the presentation after this is also going to highlight it even more, is around how we want to adopt the open source ecosystem. There is a ton of innovation that's in the open source community, especially around data science and AI, and we don't want to necessarily reinvent the wheel. We want to make sure that we are adopting those open source frameworks where applicable and giving you an option to even reuse the existing work that you may already have done using those frameworks. And I'll talk about that in a second here in a little more detail. The second area of focus for Microsoft is really around making sure that these systems are mission critical, especially when it comes to data science and when you're trying to experiment on large data sets and build machine learning models. You need to have scalability as a minimum requirement where you can spin up multiple clusters of GPU nodes as an example and run these large data processing tasks and be able to do that in a scalable manner, but also at the same time in a secure manner. So when we talk about mission critical, it's really around how you as a customer, when you're adopting these capabilities, can make sure that those critical needs are addressed. The last focus area, but not the least by any means, is around how do we enable you to build these capabilities in a responsible manner. So we call that responsible AI. And this is all about providing you with the tools where you can make sure that as you're building these models, you have options to go back and understand why the models were built in a certain way. What specific features were utilized when those models were built, which ones were more important, so that you can make the right responsible business decisions if those models actually serve the purpose it's meant to serve. Another area that's also very important here is around items like understanding bias in your data set. You don't want to be creating models that may be biased to a certain population category or to a certain set of sensitive features. So we want to also make sure that we give you tools that enable you to understand bias in your data set, as an example, as you're building these models, and how do you mitigate for that bias. So responsible AI is an equally important topic. So those are the three pillars that we are focused on as we are building a lot of these Azure AI services. And then at the middle of the slide, you see how we actually look at those AI services in different blocks. I'll start with the one at the bottom, which is our machine learning service. A lot of times when you hear about AI, machine learning gets thrown in the same discussion. Machine learning is obviously a key piece of AI, but it's not AI by itself. And so machine learning service for Microsoft is all about how do you bring your own models or even build data science models from scratch, but not just be able to do that one time, but be able to manage that entire infrastructure end to end. As you talk about a data science life cycle, all the way from taking data, training the data, and then implementing into an actual deployment target, and then managing the life cycle, there are lots of moving parts. Azure Machine Learning is a platform that Microsoft offers where you can do that end-to-end process in a seamless manner, whether it's automating them, whether it's implementing CI/CD type software development best practices into the machine learning world. Azure Machine Learning is the Microsoft service that enables you to do that. So this is really aimed at a data science audience, whether you're a data scientist or you're a citizen data scientist that's looking to build these models. It's also aimed at the IT ops and the data engineer persona that's now having to stand these models up and implement them in production or deploy them in production. So it is catered to a lot of those different roles. In the middle that you see here on the slide, we also have another set of services that fall within our Azure AI umbrella. We call them cognitive services. Cognitive services are a set of pre-built AI models that Microsoft brings to the table where you can simply utilize these models in your existing applications. So not every single use case you want to build a model from scratch. Microsoft, through years of research, and also because we utilize machine learning and deep learning in many of our own existing products, whether it's Office, whether it's Xbox, whether it's Bing, all of these different services require machine learning and deep learning models as part of the product. And what we have done with cognitive services is expose those models that we have built as APIs that a developer or a customer can use in their applications. So the idea is that you don't have to, for every single scenario, build models from scratch, but you can utilize some of the models that we have available that we are allowing you to use in your applications. And so when you look at that cognitive services, we also categorize them by different categories, as you see on the slide. One is a set of models that falls under the category called vision. Then we have a set of models that fall into speech, language, decision. So depending on the domain that you're focused on, we have different services that fall into each of these different buckets. And I'll also talk a little bit about how certain customers are taking advantage of cognitive services. So the difference between the Azure Machine Learning service and the cognitive services is this. Cognitive services are pre-built AI models that you can quickly plug into your existing applications. Azure Machine Learning is a platform to build these models from scratch or bring your existing models to Azure so that you can utilize the power of the cloud to manage them on your own, and also provide you with tools to do that end-to-end machine learning lifecycle. So the remaining item on the slide is the one on top, which is our scenario-specific services. So now that we have these pre-trained models and we also have our machine learning service, we've also built certain scenario-focused services where we have heard repeatable requests from customers as areas that they're trying to solve, but for every single time they have to build it from scratch. While cognitive services provide you a capability to quickly take existing models and use it in your applications, we also want to take that one step further and solve for certain scenarios. For example, form recognizer that you see on the slide on top is aimed at a scenario where you have lots of forms, whether it's invoices, whether it's receipts, and the different types of forms that you typically have in an organization. And a lot of times what customers are trying to do is extract information from these forms, whether it's the name, the account number, the price, invoice amount, etc. If it's an invoice form, or if it's a financial document, you're extracting some key pieces of information like the SSN number, the tax ID, and things like that. So these are processes that are in place today where either a human manual process or some sort of a custom application is looking at how do I get information from these forms for some downstream processing. Since this is such a common scenario, Microsoft, using our vision-based AI models, built a service called Form Recognizer, which actually you can feed in forms of a certain type, and it will extract out key value pairs from those forms, so that now you can automate a lot of those business processes that I just talked about, where you may want to read items from an invoice, you may want to read items from a receipt as part of some sort of an automation system. That's one example. There are other examples that you can see on the scenario specific services. Another one is video indexer. A lot of times you may have data that are videos that you want to analyze. Maybe you want to look at sentiment of speakers in the videos. You may want to take the text from the video and look and understand whether the speaker is focused on a certain topic, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of different video analytics that you may be interested in. And we have a service called Video Indexer that actually takes advantage of some of the AI models behind the scenes, like speech to text, like sentiment analysis, and others. So there's lots of different examples here in terms of how you can utilize this stack. But end to end, whether you're trying to build your own models, you're trying to take advantage of existing models, or you want a service that's meant for a specific scenario, there are lots of different options here that you can see. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to double click a little bit on some of these, in the time we have. But before we do that, I mentioned that our applications are meant for different personas. So in this slide, here is another view of how you look at these scenarios and which service would be utilized by which persona. So the slide talks about two different dimensions, whether you are somebody that builds applications with a code first approach. Maybe you're a Python or an R programmer, and you want to build applications in a code first manner. Or you may be a no code, low code sort of a developer. Maybe you are a business analyst, you like a drag and drop way of modeling and building applications. And the second dimension is, are you a machine learning expert, or are you not a machine learning expert? Maybe you're a developer, but you still want to build data science applications. And if you look at it from those two dimensions, here is how some of those services that I talked about in the previous slide fit in. So on the top right, this persona here is more focused on code first way of building things. And that person is also a machine learning expert. So typically these are your professional data scientists. So they may use the Azure Machine Learning Service. And specifically within the Azure Machine Learning Service, they may use the notebooks capability to build these models using Python or R. Or on the bottom right, you may have a persona that is not a machine learning expert, but also would like to use a code first approach. So typically this is a developer that knows programming languages like Python, R, C#, etc., but not necessarily a machine learning expert. So in that case, they may use those pre-built models that I talked about in the previous slide called Azure Cognitive Services or other services like that. And then you have capabilities that you can see on the left-hand side of this quadrant, whether they are more the no-code, low-code personas that are either machine learning experts or not, and we have a lot of different capabilities for them as well. And it's not all about just using one tool versus the other. It's usually a combination. We even see within a customer organization where they may start with a persona that's building these applications in a drag and drop manner, but then once they get to a certain point, they may now have to hand that over and extend that application further by involving a data scientist, where that they may have to then come in and plug it in with some Python and R code. And that's totally possible. You can use a mix or a combination of these services is my point there. And it's not like you only have to use one versus the other. So what are some of the common AI patterns that we are seeing? We are essentially seeing these three high-level patterns. One of them is there are lots of customers that are using applications and then infusing AI into those applications. We call them AI-powered apps. So they're not really building AI applications from scratch. They're not, just going to a team of data scientists and saying, hey, go look at this data and build me a model. but they're saying, I have an existing business process or an application, and I want to infuse AI into them. So that's one pattern. The second pattern is what we call knowledge mining. And knowledge mining is all about going after unstructured data. So a lot of organizations have data that's stored in PDFs and Word documents and other types of unstructured file formats, and they want to mine for insights from these unstructured documents, whether it's looking for certain key entities, whether it's translating those documents from one language to another, whether it's looking for sentiment on how some of those documents are focused on. And so lots of different scenarios where they're wanting to mine these unstructured documents and convert them into some sort of a structure that they can later utilize either as a search, as a way to search those documents better, or in a downstream application. And so we have a lot of customers utilizing that AI pattern as well. And the last one is machine learning, which is, like I mentioned, is the most well understood scenario within AI, is building those data science models and then utilizing the Azure platform to do that. So those are the three common AI patterns that we're seeing. So I'll talk a little bit about the Azure Cognitive Services here, which is the pre-trained models, because that usually is the fastest way for you to start building an AI application. And so many of our customers start here in the Azure Cognitive Services space. And this is actually the fastest growing Azure trial service that we have today. So it's a very, very popular service, many customers using it. Like I mentioned, the idea here is that we have AI models that we have built, and we are offering them as APIs that you can utilize within your application. And the cool thing about this Azure Cognitive Services also, as you can see on the slide at the bottom, they're also customizable. Just because they're pre-built does not mean that you cannot customize them. In a lot of cases, we have customers that will then take the service and train it with their own data set, and we apply transfer learning so that the end application that you build using our service is a lot more accurate for your domain area of interest. I'll give you an example. So we have a set of services under Vision that are focused on analyzing images. You can detect an image, you can detect objects within an image, and so on and so forth. Our Vision service, we call Computer Vision, does a really good job of analyzing images because we have trained it on millions of data images that we have access to. But if you're a hospital and you're trying to analyze X-ray images, our model may not do really well in that scenario because we have not trained it on that sort of a data. So we have a customizable version of the Vision service called Custom Vision, where you can take that same Vision API, but you now train it with your data set. In this example, a set of X-rays. And now we apply transfer learning and optimize that model that we have, the neural network model that we have, so that it is able to detect X-rays better than our default model. So when you feed a new X-ray image in that example, it can identify a disease pattern as an example that you may want to be using it for. Lots of other examples like that. I mean, we have speech services where we have speech to text, call center scenarios, customers that are trying to do call center analytics and they want to understand the sentiment, or they want to focus on call center technician feedback. Our default model may do a good job, but what if you have a call center where you have speakers that are not part of the the default model that we have trained it on? Their accents are different, so you may have to train it with their own custom data set, and we offer that capability. Another cool thing about cognitive services also is, in terms of deploying these services, you don't necessarily have to always use it from a cloud service. You can actually package these services as containers, and once you package them as a microservice in a container, you can deploy them into your own data center, as an example. So it's a very cool use case where even for edge scenarios or IoT scenarios where you want to deploy these models in a remote offshore oil gas drill, as an example, where you don't have necessarily connectivity back to the cloud, you still can do that. We have customers, especially oil and gas customers, that are utilizing those services for that exact use case that I just mentioned. Now I'll talk a little bit about Azure Machine Learning. And I mentioned a lot of this already in terms of how we make sure that this service is available for different skill levels. We provide the full lifecycle management capabilities. We call that MLOps. Talk about responsible ML a little bit. And then also the fact that it is a very open and interoperable service. So we don't have really a opinion on what frameworks that you should be utilizing. And so when we say open and interoperable, what we mean by that is that you can bring your own tool of choice. if you're already familiar with Jupyter or you're already familiar with Visual Studio Code, PyCharm, no matter what IDE, you can bring that and still use the Azure Machine Learning Service to build your models. Or you may say that I already have a lot of popular open source libraries and frameworks that I'm using today, whether it's TensorFlow, PyTorch, Scikit-learn, etc. No problem. We actually do utilize the latest frameworks, even in our own internal algorithms, but you can also use or bring your own libraries and frameworks to the service. And we also offer back a lot of this innovation back to the community. So for example, under responsible AI, we have a framework called FairLearn that helps you assess your model for fairness. And that actually we've open sourced it and offering it so that you don't necessarily even have to use Azure Machine Learning in that example. You can use that SDK in your own custom application. And then we have a lot of partners that we work with, like Databricks and others, for those data engineering needs. I think Ron mentioned this as part of the previous session. Having a good data estate is the first step before you can build your machine learning models. The old adage of garbage in, garbage out cannot be more true for machine learning. So if you have bad data, you're not going to get great models. So the first step is to really go through that data engineering process, build a pipeline where you have access to good quality data. And we have tools like Databricks and even Azure Synapse Analytics where you can do that. But once you do that, then you can bring those data sets into the Azure Machine Learning lifecycle, and using some of these capabilities that I talked about, you can build those models. And the last pattern I'll talk about, and then I'll pause. I know we are right at the end. We have 5 more minutes. The last pattern I'll talk about is this thing called knowledge mining, which is also gaining a lot of attention, and many of our customers utilizing this. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of customers that have unstructured document that looks like this, whether it's PowerPoint, HTML, Word documents, images, video files, you name it. What they're trying to do is that they're trying to ingest all of these documents and uncover latent insights from them. And the way you do that is there is a service within our Azure AI portfolio called Azure Search that you can utilize to ingest all of these documents and then crack them open automatically, but then apply AI skills on top of it, whether it's translating these documents from one language to another. Maybe some of these documents have images and you want to apply OCR to read text from those images and then utilize the text to search on those keywords. OCR skills are automatically enabled within the service. So we have a lot of AI skills that we enable, whether it's detecting entities, linking entities, searching for keywords within these documents, so on and so forth. So knowledge mining is another area that we are heavily focused on from Microsoft, where you can utilize a number of these services. So I know that was a pretty quick walkthrough of a lot of different capabilities that we have, but at a high level, if you want to think about it, it's very flexible in terms of offerings. And like I showed you earlier, there are lots of customers utilizing this, and would love to hear if you have any questions, there are any use cases that you all are working on,